Hey everybody, it is Trags Mike Petralia back with the latest installment of the Jungle Roar podcast, powered by our good friends at Game Time Tickets and everyone at CLNS Media. It is my pleasure to welcome, as the NFL playoffs are officially underway, Paul Dehner Jr. of The Athletic. Does a tremendous job covering all things NFL and the Bengals for The Athletic. He also has a friend in the room that you may not be able to see. His name is Uncle Phil. I'm a dog lover, okay? Yeah. And I think everybody who certainly knows me knows I love my dog. I love my grand dog, Janie's dog, Raja, in Philadelphia. So I am obsessed with dogs. So I'm willing, and not only willing, I am ready and enthusiastic to welcome all animals that might be a part of this podcast.
Well, look, if a mailman attempts to deliver mail to my house, he'll be on the podcast real soon. I can tell you that. Or if there's any kind of thunder, you will hear him beating his way underneath my feet as he hides underneath the desk here, because that's pretty much his number one move. But yeah, he comes up here when it's cold. It's good to have the off-season mode, Trags. You know how it is.
I do.
It's me and my dog in the house for a lot of the day. I don't get to go evacuate to the stadium and we go down there and I'm away. No, I'm here. And Uncle Phil's like, all right, I'm coming under the desk. He's an older dog. He's like 10 years old.
Yep.
And so used to be, there were certain parts of the house that are off limits. We're trying to keep it under control. And now I'm just weak. I'm just weak. I just let him go wherever he wants to. He has full run of the house at this point.
Let me ask you, he's an animal. Does he roar in the jungle?
He would roar. Not as loud as I wanted to roar. I wanted to open this podcast. I wanted to be responsible for keeping the jungle roaring. Can I do it? Can I roar once?
Yes, you can. Go right ahead.
I'm here to roar.
Remember, one of the things I remember about Old Riverfront Stadium, where the jungle was actually born, was the roar that would come on after a Bengals big play or a touchdown. You would hear that tiger up on that old scoreboard in center, and then you would hear what Paul Dehner Jr. just did into the microphone. It would be that kind of guttural roar. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, we have those pleasantries out of the way, Paul Dehner Jr.
Enough of that. Enough niceties. Enough jokes, okay? Let's get down to cutting some guys. Come on.
Well, before we cut some guys, I want to talk about the NFL playoffs. And I told a lot of people in the press box over the last couple of weeks, over the last two games, actually, the home game against Denver and the roadie at Pittsburgh, you know what's going to be written. The Bengals are the best team not in the playoffs. And I must tell you that watching this first weekend of playoffs, there wasn't a lot of excitement. There wasn't a lot of drama, really, in any of these games. And I'm thinking to myself, the Bengals, had they gotten in, I do believe they could have made a run deep into the playoffs. And I think they would have been an entertaining product with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Tee Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson. What say you?
This weekend reminded me of a conversation that I had with somebody inside the Bengals building in early November. And it was, whatever. We get in. The AFC is so weak beyond the top couple. We just got to find a way in, and we'll be able to be the team that no one wants to see and be able to beat anybody. The AFC is not, the juggernaut that we talked about it being a couple of years ago. And that was apparent early in the season. And it was really apparent this weekend that there is such a clear line, I think, between the top three. I get Houston with a nice performance that they needed this weekend, but I'm not putting them in that tier. Just such a clear line, I think, between the top three and everybody else that the Bengals easily could have been in there to make that four. They weren't. They blew it. But I specifically remember that conversation and thinking, that feels about right. We'll see how the rest of it goes. And it proved quite prophetic.
And I actually think they could have had a chance at Buffalo, that based on the way Buffalo played, obviously, on Sunday afternoon against Denver after they fell behind 7-0 on that deep post early in the game. It was all Buffalo. I do wonder if the Bengals would have had a chance in that game. I think the Bengals know the Buffalo Bills better than Denver certainly did going into that game. You We're not talking about a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix. You would have been talking about Joe Burrow. I think it at least would have been very competitive.
Yeah, I think if you look at the way those two teams were playing late in the year, it would have been. I mean, the Bengals were generally competitive against everybody. I mean, they're right. They're very similar to that Denver team, but I think they would have matched up well. I think Lou Anarumo with a chance to do some game planning against a team and a player he's familiar with. I mean, arguably the best game plan. People talk about him and Patrick Mahomes over the years. I think the best game plan I've ever seen him put together was the one against Buffalo in the playoff game that they won in the snow. I mean, it was masterful with the way they were able to contain Josh Allen and take his weapons away from him. And they're different now, and this is all hypotheticals, but I do think you like their chances. I would expect them to be there and be competitive. They would have been, and they probably would have found a way to lose at the end, which was kind of the way they were against all the elite teams. But you never know. They did find ways to win the last 2 games of the season. None of it matters, though, Trags. None of it matters because they didn't do it. They blew it, and they played like trash.
Beat New England
of the season
in a must-win. Paul
must
Dehner
win in week 1. Trags, you called it. You said it. Must win week 1, and you were right.
What did you think of, by the way, speaking of New England, Mike Vrabel and the Patriots will be coming to
I was wondering how long we were going to get until we got a Patriots drop in here, Trags. How do we make it 6 minutes already?
6:25 to be exact.
Without talking about New England and the Patriots.
Who's watching a clock anyway? I think Mike Vrabel to New England was a natural. People asked me what I thought would happen with Gerard Mayo, and I had heard rumblings inside that building, as I still have contacts back there, that it was not a good situation. Gerard Mayo was hired because there was a promise made to him by Robert Kraft, as the story goes, and Robert Kraft was going to keep that promise, but it turned into such a dumpster fire there, and he had lost the locker room. The name that I had heard from the get-go, even before Mayo was hired, after Belichick was fired, the guy they really wanted was Mike Vrabel. And they finally get their guy. I think there's going to be a new accountability in that organization. What's curious to me is Mike Vrabel, as Bengal fans well remember, is a guy who loves to run the ball, power run game that they obviously had with Derrick Henry in Tennessee. But they have had Ryan Tannehill, Marcus Mariota. He's now got Drake May. And it'll be fascinating to me to see how he handles a young, progressive, down-the-field quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the one knock on Vrabel in Tennessee was developing an offense and being able to be more of an offensive visionary, but culture setter, guy that knows what he's doing. He made sense there. It's the most logical fit in the entire league, has been for a while. And you can just hear the conversations there. Can we get Vrabel? Because if we can get Vrabel, like that's what everybody wants to do here, right? Right? Like that makes sense. It's there for the long term. And you just see him up there on the podium and you're like, yeah, like this feels like this is where he was always supposed to be, right?
Well, and back to the Bengals. This is a Bengals podcast. And there were so many games and moments this past season. You win one of those, literally you win either the New England game, you win the Chargers game. You're in the playoffs, and then we're not having this discussion. But we have to move on and look at that Bengal roster. You have a great piece, Paul, on The Athletic that I want to get into in depth about Bengal free agents and sorting out who stays and who might be done in Cincinnati. It is, one of the classic what-ifs of the Bengals offseason. You write, the Bengals have 19 unrestricted, 2 restricted, and 4 exclusive rights free agents to decide on in the coming months. Where do you begin, Paul?
Well, you begin with Tee Higgins, which is, the big fish, to the point that it deserved its own story. I was like looking to go through this list, and I was like, okay, here we go. I'll go one at a time. And I put in like the first 3 words of Tee Higgins. I'm like, what am I doing? This has to be its own. There's not enough words. You could write about it every day at this point. It's such a critical decision. And it's so divisive internally in terms of, who's going to win this battle royal where the line has been drawn so clearly, I think, between ownership and Joe Burrow and everything else. So that's where you start. And I think, and I don't know what your feel is, but mine is that this is as much of a coin flip as you've seen a major decision in a long time. I think there's real arguments on both sides of the fence here. It's extremely complicated when you throw in the idea of it being connected to the Jamar Chase deal, being probably connected to a Burrow restructure,
Right.
and then having to also get a deal done with T, which they haven't been able to do. How much money do they have to actually do it? How far away from their typical structures of guarantees are they willing to go? What does he want to do to stay? And then on top of all of that, what if the market just shows up and is like, we'll give Tee Higgins whatever. He's the number one free agent in the market. Teams that need receivers start bidding against each other, and he has to say, am I really going to take $10 million less a year to stay in Cincinnati? That's a lot of money. There are so many variables that makes it really hard to predict. I think T wants to be in Cincinnati. I think that is the beginning of this discussion. And that is why he has a new agent. That is the basis of all of this, is that what it felt like it was gone because they knew they were never going to get a deal done with David Mulugheta. And when that changed, and when the big three started getting together and saying, we can do this, that changed everything. And now it feels realistic because he wants to be there and there is a path. The question is, do the Bengals want to go down that path? Are they willing to do what it takes to go down that path? And that is what we will all find out over the next couple of months as all these variables start to, become reality really quickly. It's look, it's either whatever if they're going to franchise tag and trade or whatever they're going to do. Free agency's right around the corner. And so he's set to hit free agency in March if they don't do something about it.
I think you asked me what my read is on it. I think Tee Higgins is leaning, or I think the situation is leaning towards a Tee Higgins return. And the reason I say that is Bengals have always prioritized their own, especially when it comes to superstars. I do believe that if Mike Brown still has a significant say in the organization, and there's nothing to lead me to believe that he doesn't, he's always favored star wide receivers. It's just so happens that in this particular case, he has two of them. And I think he understands that this team right now is built around Joe Burrow, and you need to give Joe Burrow one or two weapons in this particular case to account for the fact that you're going to have to rebuild the defense. Rebuilding the defense is its own animal, is its own problem to solve off to the side. If you're going to go about rebuilding the defense, you need an offense that can carry the weight. And I think the offense is significantly better, almost 2 times as more powerful with a Tee Higgins on the roster than without him.
Yeah, and when you're really talking about the monetary balance sheet elements of this, the 2026 balance sheet is wide open. Okay. Like, yeah, you have Burrow's contract, but you're starting from scratch. They have the third most cap room on the 2026 sheet right now. And I think that they'll end up in the top 5 probably once all said and done with all the cuts that they can do for this year too. But, really the bulk of this between Jamar and T's deals, you're really going to feel the hardest hit in 26 and in 27. Well, you have room to start from scratch almost there, but you don't have a ton of guys that maybe you thought you were going to extend or that you wanted to get more deals done with. Like, you just don't really have that. And I think, if you're looking today, who are you? What is your identity as a team? What is the way you beat people on wild card weekend, on AFC championship game weekend? You beat them by saying you can't stop these 3. Okay. And they prove that the foundation of really, if everything else goes wrong for them organizationally and they have those 3, they can go 9-8. We learned that this year because everything kind of went wrong around them with an historically bad defense, losing every close game, a line that fell apart in front of Joe Burrow. And they still went 9-8 with those 3. And I feel like a guy who you drafted, who you developed, who loves it here and wants to be here, and Joe Burrow wants him here, you build around those 3 and you start figuring out the rest after that.
All right, you're right also. They also have a long list of realistic cut candidates that could clear anywhere from $30 to $50 million more off the 2025 cap. I guess the natural question is to ask you, Paul, where do you begin with those cuts?
Yeah,
who are the leading candidates?
Yeah, well, it's going to be out tomorrow, the second part there, that story. So I have it all in front of me right now as I finish it up. Obviously, I have to weave some beautiful prose in here first, but I do have the numbers in front of me. So Sheldon Rankins is the obvious. There's no chance he's back. So I mean, he will save you $8.6 million against the cap. I mean, they're going to end up giving him $14 million in cash for 287 snaps, 4 pressures, and 1 sack. And I hope he's okay with the illness and everything that went down. But before that, this was decided. I mean, he did not deliver on anything they needed him to be. And it's arguably one of the biggest reasons that defense went sideways this year, not having a secondary pass rusher that they kind of counted on Rankins to be. And that's a miscalculation on their part, to be fair, but not having that opposite Hendrickson really hurt them. Second would be Alex Kappa. They're going to move on. They need 2 new starting guards. One of them probably a veteran, maybe 2, but definitely 1. Kappa saves you $8 million. He's 30, going to be 30 at the start of camp. Saves you $8 million. You only take on 2.3 dead. So you're talking about it's time. I mean, you're going into the last year of his deal. You're going to end up having paid Kappa 3 years, $27 million. He was exactly what you needed, the serviceability you needed at that point in time. No shame in that. You would do that deal again in a heartbeat, but it's time to get out from under that and probably almost on a 1-for-1, I would think, head into free agency and say, okay, what guard can we give $8 million to per year, right? I mean, that feels like almost exactly what you would do here and find the next Alex Kappa. That'd be a place you would start. My third in the place where you absolutely start is Jermaine Pratt. It's $5.9 million you would save there, $2.3 million in dead. You just can't have that level of missed tackles and lack of effort. He was second in the league in yards after catch allowed, 450 yards after the catch allowed via PFF this year. I mean, you saw it all year. A new defensive coordinator, rebuilding a defense, and you can save $6 million essentially. I think you're going to see a coordinator is going to want to come in and install one of his guys that's his type of system guys in the middle of that defense at linebacker, and Pratt would not be part of that.
All right, a name that I'm going to get to some defensive big names that you have listed down here in terms of free agents. The one that intrigues me the most, and I may be in the minority in this, is Joseph Ossai, because he gives you, at least the way he was playing at the end of the year, Paul, he gives you exactly, I think, what the Bengals need opposite of Trey Hendrickson.
Yeah, I think they need more of that, though. Like, I think I don't think Ossai gives you enough to plug him in. I love Ossai as a rotational third or fourth guy. It kind of what he maybe, if you get what he became this year a little bit more and maybe rejuvenated with a new voice, that you talk about somebody who lived in Lou Anarumo's doghouse for the majority of his career. Right. He did until this year, and he finally kind of found his way out and found some playing time. And you saw glimpses every time he got a chance, but he was too often not getting a chance. So maybe he's rejuvenated by a new coordinator. Maybe that brings more of what you saw late in the season out of him. He still wasn't winning a ton, like quick wins. His reputation coming out of Texas and who he kind of was here was that relentless pursuit type of player. And you saw a lot of that. And that's fine. Like, it doesn't matter how you affect the quarterback. But I think for a guy opposite Trey Hendrickson, I want a quick winner there more often than not. But I love Ossai as my third or fourth edge. And so what is the market? He's 25. He's coming off a season where people are seeing the ascending nature of his production. So what will he get? What will other teams view him as? I don't know. It's a really big question mark for me in terms of free agency of what people think of him. Because I think the Bengals have interest. I get the sense they have interest in bringing him back, but I don't think there's going to be interest in bringing him back to be the starter opposite Trey Hendrickson, nor would they value him that way. So that becomes a thing of what if somebody else in the league does value him that way, well, he's going to go. But if it becomes a thing where, hey, here I am, I'm an option. I'll just go back here for a year. I didn't see the market I thought I would, and find a way into this mix with a new coordinator. Then maybe that's it. He may be the ultimate change of scenery candidate on this whole list, though, who just probably feels like somebody who wouldn't mind having a fresh start somewhere.
Can you see the Bengals going 3-4 with a new defensive coordinator?
Yeah. I mean, I think they kind of did. I mean, they're playing that 5-2 a lot and base downs. And the difference to me is it's not necessarily about base, because I do think everyone's kind of multiple in different ways anymore.
Yeah,
but
true.
It's a willingness to employ the tweener edge rushers, the speed edge rushers that, Lou Anarumo was like, my edge rushers look one way. They are 6'4", 266 pounds, and they have power off the edge. That is his style. It's a reason Nolan Smith isn't here. It's a reason a lot of the smaller guys that were more the speed edge rushers, that would be considered outside linebacker, 3-4 outside linebacker types, didn't come here or even really get a look here. Everybody they invested in or drafted looks the same at that position. That can be the biggest. I think that's the biggest difference in what you can change. And call it a 3-4 maybe, or maybe just call it a willingness to expand a little bit more the types of players they put out there setting that edge. But I think that could be the difference that you see. And you would think so. I mean, that I don't know how much that's just a Lou Anarumo thing. But it seems like you would expect. There's just so many of those guys that come out in the draft and you see have success, in the league right now, that it seems like going that direction would be, something that a new guy would do.
What about Mike Hilton?
He's interesting in that I think there's two there. It's a philosophical debate in a couple of sides. It is I saw like 3 dudes that could make plays on that defense this year. There were hardly anybody. And Mike was one of them. So you'd say, do not let one of the only people actually making plays go. On the other side of it, the only way they're really going to salvage this thing defensively quickly is these young corners feeling emboldened to take over. And take over together and become a group that just becomes young, fast, hungry, become a leader. You feel like take ownership over that entire operation, okay? You can't really do that if Mike Hilton's still there because of the respect you have for him, the leader he has been. He'd wear a C on his chest rightfully. And that's really hard. I think they need probably to go. There's going to be some people in the building that are going to say, no, like Mike Hilton has been a good player. He is still a good player. He needs to stay here. Throw his coverage deficiencies aside. He's one of the best blitzing slots, and there's got to be a use for him. I think it eventually ends with them realizing that they have to give that room over to the young corners with a new coordinator. I think that becomes it. And Mike probably is the victim of that. He will get paid somewhere, and someone will want that on their team because the way he was playing at the end of the year is valuable. And so I look forward to seeing where that ends up being. I think they eventually say, we are this young defensive back room, and we're going to let these guys take ownership over it.
Here's something that fascinates me is, will the next defensive coordinator of the Cincinnati Bengals come from outside, or will it be an internal hire? Because we all know, and you've written this and you've said this, you get one of these with the massive coaching change that Zach Taylor implemented immediately after this season. You get one of those. But if it goes south again, what happens if you bring in an outside guy who is looked upon very favorably and the internal candidate or the internal head coach is not successful? Well, then you can easily look towards that external guy as your new head coach. In other words, why would you introduce a threat to your own position? The theory would go, Zach Taylor would likely hire internally. What kind of stock do you take in that type of theory?
Not much. I don't think that's even a part of this equation. I don't think there's any thought of an internal hire. I don't think there's any worry of what if this person takes my job, because the bottom line is, if this defense is good, they might win the Super Bowl. And that nothing, I think you have to at some point have some belief that, like, look, what we're doing here on offense with a decent defense is going to win so many games. And, what they have cooking offensively is really what they're based on. And they're looking for, there's nobody internally that's going to come in. You need new voice. It needs fresh voice. It needs fresh eyes and fresh leadership. And so that has to come from the outside. And that needs to be the energizing force behind this defense going from 28th to whatever, 15th or better. And so I think you can't coach scared. I don't think Zach Taylor could ever really be accused of coaching scared in that regard.
Good point.
In terms of taking credit, blame, whatever, all that stuff. There's a lot of things people say and can about him. I don't view that as part of it. I think, he knows that he wants to win a Super Bowl, and he can do it here with Joe Burrow, the way this offense is going. If the defense is solid, hell, they might have done it this year if the defense was 18th. So I don't think there's any thought of that. I don't think internal hire is even on the sheet. No, not at all.
What about what you are actually hearing about the defensive coordinator position, Paul? Are they getting close? Because it sounds like, at least in the weeks since DeMarcus Covington and I believe Patrick Graham, they've been pretty quiet.
Yeah, I think, you get into this time of year now where maybe you're waiting to talk to one or two other guys that aren't really available yet, right? I've talked about Al Golden, who makes a ton of sense as Notre Dame's current defensive coordinator, who was the linebackers coach here in 20 and in 21, did a great job with that group of young linebackers, and obviously has done an incredible job at Notre Dame and leading them now to the national championship on the backs of that defense. Certainly seems like a guy that they would want to talk to, that he's the connections candidate, where it's like, boy, him, he knows you. There's no devil you don't know here. Like, he can do a great job. He has proven to develop young players. He did it here. He's done it at Notre Dame. That could be that could be an answer for you. Well, he's kind of a big week for Al. So, you can't get to him yet. So I think you reach that with some any candidates that are still playing in the playoffs right now, that maybe you want to have more time to get to. And, are you going to lose? I think they have the number one defensive coordinator job on the market. Are they going to lose out on somebody by waiting that they really want? I don't think so. I think anybody, they're the domino that's going to push that market along. It's not going to move without them, because whoever the top ones are going to be looking in Cincinnati saying, this is where I want to be, at least their top candidates. So I think that's where it's at now. There's too many young guys that they would like to talk to and interview and get a feel for that they would just move along and say, timing didn't work out. I don't see that being the case. So that ends up, you get some lulls like this right now.
I want to go back to free agency for a moment and how the Bengals approach this free agent market, and in terms of what their needs are going to be. Off defensive line, obviously, Paul, they're going to have to address that both internally and on the edges, like we've already mentioned. The offensive line is fascinating to me because I think you're right. I think they're going to probably need two guards. I don't know if that's going to come in terms of free agency or the draft. So in terms of where they go in free agency, and how much that sets the market for, or not the market, but their strategy heading into the draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is one veteran guard that is going to be plugged in as a starter on, by March 16th. Like, I think the early in free agency, they're going to spy that. They're going to focus on what they want to get, and whoever it is their target is for the new offensive line coach, who's a great pass protecting guard first and foremost. And then after that, I think they turn their faces to, okay, maybe a bargain type of guy in a competition, plus a draft pick, plus what they have already in-house coming back. The Cody Fords, if they can bring him back, Jackson Kirkland, if he can become part of the mix. Maybe you see a bump from Cordell Volson. There's a lot of guys that could be in a big competition there. who knows what will happen with anybody else in the building. And another draft pick comes in. Could he be a guy that could win? And you have kind of a battle royal along with a solid veteran that is, there for that other spot. And I think you feel really good at that point. I mean, you're still kind of hunting potentially a successor to Ted Karras at center. Could Matt Lee become that? Is another draft pick that you could still go in a year early on that too in the draft, a 4th round pick that could become your starting center next year. Maybe he's in a competition this year or higher, or a higher investment in that too. There's a lot of different directions you can go, but I think it feels like one primary free agent, one decent draft pick, and then throw it all together. And I think you feel pretty solid about that mix. And now depth, swing tackle is probably could use another piece this year's Trent Brown, I guess, which probably won't be last year's Trent Brown, I would think. And so I would think that you probably see something like that as well to get more depth behind Amarius and Orlando Brown. But I think it's not as far off, I think, as it looked when you watched.
I think the one area that has to improve, and I know a lot of people have written about this and certainly talked about it, the scouting and the drafting. That has to improve. They have to get more production out of their top 3 to 4 rounds than they have in the last 2 years. And that is absolutely critical given what we've already laid out for our audience, and that is the pending transactions with Tee Higgins, with Jamar Chase, with how they restructure their free agency. They're going to absolutely have to hit better in the draft.
Trags, you were so kind. Do you realize how kind you just were? You said the last 2 years. I was going to say the last 12 years they need to be better at drafting the offensive line. I mean, this goes so far back. This predates Zach Taylor. This damn near predates me. And I've been around here for 15 years. Okay. Like it's wild since Kevin Zeitler, how bad it's been. And so you're right. I don't know if it's a philosophical change, if it's a new hire who's, sort of their trench consultant. I don't know, man, something. I think you need to do something there, because what's been happening in the way they've been evaluating that, maybe it's not being on the same page with your offensive line coach. And maybe this new coach can come in and be a big part of helping create a better vision. But whatever it is, it's not working and has not worked for some time now. Mims is a freak, and he may end up being their one saving grace here at this moment as far as a pick that's going to work out, because he certainly looks like they hit it with him. But there's so many fails. They have to find a way to get better there. You're right.
No question about it. What else are you working on, Paul?
Right now, DC search is certainly underway. Tee Higgins story is up. We have the right now going into the players that they might cut. We talked a little bit about that earlier. I think, I've got to get to it. It's very exciting, but it's a lot of legwork in the background for me. It is the mock offseason, the choose your own adventure sheet for the offseason, where everybody can go and do their own balance sheet and cut who they want and trade who they want and figure out if they can fit it all under the cap, under the way the Bengals operate, and get a true sense of what, Trags? The pie.
Yes.
Ooh, we love pie exercises. And it won't be long. It won't be long until maybe we'll actually get to talk to Duke Coben at some point, Trags, without having to travel to another friggin' state. Maybe we'll actually get to talk to the guy. And so when we get that, then we'll get to hear all about the pie all over again.
On a serious note, when you have had the history that you've had here in Cincinnati with draft, a lack of draft production.
Yeah.
You need to address the fans. You need to address the audience.
Apparently you don't.
It's always been, let's not say anything rather than say the wrong thing. To me, that is essentially why. Because fans often wonder, why do certain organizations operate in one way? They're completely forward with the fan base, and another approach is, we're not going to say a word. We're going to let our product on the field speak for itself, for better or for worse. And that is apparently the way the Bengals have obviously chosen, but that is the way they're going to continue to operate. And, they're going to let the chips fall where they may.
Well, I think that's the thing is, that's also part of the reason that I think fans struggle. I don't feel like they understand what is going on and what the team's vision is and how they're viewing things, because Zach Taylor is the spokesperson, but so often the things that need to be said don't have anything to do with his direct opinion, and he'll even say as much. I mean, that's a question for the front office. It's a question for Duke, and they are. And there's only so many things that can be said. And so when the season ends, and trust me, I went across and looked at everybody that got eliminated last week, and there they are. There's all the GMs, there's all the execs standing in front of their fans, speaking about what happened and speaking about what's next. The ones that didn't get, that didn't fire a coach, and the ones that got eliminated, almost all of them were up there speaking last week. And you know what? And because you have to address that. It's the point to do it with your fans. You don't need to turn it into something that happens a month down the road to two people that are able to travel to another state or whatever, or wait to the combine when that's their choice. That's their choice. But I do think the fans, the anger and the frustration that you hear vented all the time, a lot of it comes from feeling like they don't know what your vision is. They don't feel like they understand the explanation. And the moment they do, typically they feel better about it and have a little bit better understanding of when the team's point of view. But I just feel like that's not really as out there right now.
Well, we can position ourselves. We can try to reach the fan base and let them know that we understand.
Yeah.
But the Bengals are not. The Bengals operate in the way they operate. And that is true for pretty much all 32 NFL teams. I know, speaking with those down in Tennessee, when I had one of their beat writers on, they go through the same thing with their owner. And their ownership, their front office, they will not approach the fan base. You can get, my point here is, you can get upset about it all you want, but at the end of the day, they are not going to change the way they do business. And you have to accept that at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think you accept it, but I think this was an opportunity to change that and kind of, we talk all the time about them modernizing and operating like almost all the teams do. This would have been another opportunity to do that, the way that most teams, if you're not going to make, even a lot of teams go overboard, you would say. They've got GM out there after the trade deadline. They've got them out there before the season, and it's not like there's not available. It's not that we don't talk to them or don't hear or know their point of view. It's that there are certain times when it's necessary. And I think the moment the season ends, that's why almost all teams handle it that way, is one of those. And I just think they're missing the mark on that right now. But hey, you're right. It's their prerogative to operate that way. They are not forced to do so,
right.
and they can choose to operate however they'd like to.
And I would say this in conclusion, that I do think that the ownership of the Bengals, the Brown family, the Blackburn family, are much more receptive and cognizant of player needs now, i.e. the brand new locker room investment, the investment in the facilities, than they were, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And certainly you could speak better to that than I could.
Yeah, they have modernized in almost every way. I mean, they have changed 85% of things they were rightly criticized for a decade ago. And I think that's good. It's progress. They have done those things. And this is a minor version of those. I mean, it's not necessarily even a huge deal. I just think it's, this is one way that would seem to make the most sense. And specifically right now, when I think fans feel very, lost and not really understanding quite what's going on or what exactly your plan is, and feel like, honestly, that you can't sit here and talk about accountability for players and all the accountability talk that goes on throughout a building, and then when the season ends, there's no accountability from those who made the decisions about this personnel group that failed.
He is Paul Dehner Jr. He does a tremendous job and has for years and years and years for not only back in the day, the Inquirer, but now certainly the Athletic. He is host of the Growler podcast. Will you be on location, by the way, with any events upcoming for the Growler podcast? Or
no, we're back in house now again. We're just cranking through all the off-season stuff right now, but I'm sure once we get closer into free agency and draft season, we'll be back out there again. And we did a big draft show last year, and so I'm sure that stuff will be coming up. So plenty of time to get out there.
Well, he is Paul Dehner Jr. Paul, thanks so much as always for joining me on this edition of the Jungle Roar podcast, brought to you and powered by our good friends at Game Time Tickets and CLNS Media. For Paul Dehner Jr., my name is Mike Petraglia Trags, and you know the tagline, keep that jungle roaring.
Roar.